Good Thursday, everyone. This is Mike McCleary, and on behalf of Marine Money, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the second of 3 webinars we're hosting today that comprise the second day of our New York Ship Finance Forum virtual style. Today's focus is offshore wind and continuing the discussion we began in the first session. All attendee microphones are muted to optimize the quality of the audio for everyone. I'd like to introduce our first speaker now. That is Charlie Papavizas, partner and chair of the Maritime practice at Winston Strawn. He's been actively engaged in the U.S. offshore wind sector since 2009 and counsels a number of clients working in various aspects of the industry. This is particularly helpful when foreign entities, in many cases with deep experience in offshore wind development, seek to enter the growing U.S. market by joining forces with U.S. companies. Charlie is not only a Jones Act expert, but fair to say a Jones Act historian, publishing a 2-part article on Jones Act history in Tulane's Maritime Law Journal. The first part was published earlier this year, and the second part will be published early next year. We're delighted to have him with us today. Charlie, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, my family thinks that I know more about Senator Wesley Livesey Jones than any of his living relatives. I don't think that's true, but it might be a close call. So, John, can you put up the slides that we have? Thank you, and go ahead in advance, please. So we're gonna talk a little bit about how a foreign owner, ship owner, operator, manager might get into the U.S. market. There's, of course, 2 different ways to do it. One is the direct way, which is to bring a foreign vessel in the United States waters and operate in compliance with U.S. laws as they might apply. The one, of course, that's usually uppermost in people's minds is the Jones Act, because it does restrict foreign vessels from many activities. And that's not something I'm going to talk about today. That's a presentation for another day. Some of you may have heard me speak at other conferences and the like about that, and it's a complicated subject on its own. The fact that we've been very actively engaged with lots of European ship owners over the last 3 years, and we still haven't answered all the questions, tells you, I think, a lot about how complicated that subject is. So instead, today we'll talk about the indirect way, the joint venture way, how to get into the market by teaming up with an American company and running vessels in the U.S. market. And there also, the Jones Act's the main impediment because it provides citizenship requirements with respect to the ownership, operation, or management of vessels. So John, why don't you advance, please? So just to I'll talk a little bit about the basics. What do we mean by citizenship requirements? Then move on to a couple of exceptions that sometimes are brought up. And then finally, the most important part, which is what kind of structuring tools are available to create a joint venture between a foreign company and an American company and comply with the Jones Act. So there's more than one type of U.S. citizenship. The one that we're going to concentrate on is the coastwise citizenship. All of them require an entity organized in the United States. All of them require predominantly U.S. citizen management. You can have foreign directors, but only within limits. The main difference between a coastwise citizen and the other types of citizens is that a coastwise citizen must be owned 75% in turn by U.S. citizens. Next slide, please. So this 75% requirement is usually the greatest sticking point when it comes to forming a joint venture. It's actually a pretty vague concept on purpose. It applies to equity interests of various types, and it also very broadly encompasses control, which is also a pretty vague concept. You can see that it's also a very broad concept, by any other means. Control by any other means cannot be afforded to non-citizens. Long ago, U.S. courts have determined that they will look to the substance and not the form. In that case, the U.S. lawyers had a tiny monetary interest in the company and claimed to be in control. The Chinese interests had most of the monetary interest and claimed not to be in control. And the court said, give us a break. We think the Chinese interests are in control. So whenever you're doing structuring, you should also think of the camel's back. You should think, well, what factors are we adding? So we have foreign directors, we maximized foreign participation in the equity, maybe we have a time charter involved, and so on. All those factors get thrown into the pot. All become facts and circumstances the US government will take into account to determine who is in control. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of exceptions. Neither of them usually are that relevant in this kind of a joint venture context. The lease finance one might be the most relevant. I just mentioned them so that you're aware of them. You can always return to them. Next slide, please. So the most important part of this presentation anyway is to tell you a little bit about what you can do to create a successful joint venture. And one of the things you can work with is debt. The 75% requirement only applies to current equity. Generally, indebtedness is ignored, so a non-citizen can lend to a Jones Act company, take back a mortgage on a vessel, and that's not an issue. It's only when the debt gets crazy, 110% financing or something non-market, that you run into a problem. Equity pledges, not so clear, but in any event, debt, including convertible debt, not a problem. Next slide, please. Similarly, the law focuses on current equity. It doesn't focus on equity that might come into being, springing into being, warrants, options, and the like. These sort of devices have become very important in the restructurings of Jones Act companies. All the recent restructurings, Tidewater, American Commercial Lines, Hornbeck, and the like. All the foreign lenders, if they've been unable to prove U.S. citizenship, have been required to take warrants when they've been converted into equity. And those warrants are transferable to citizens and then exercisable by citizens. But in any event, the warrants sometimes can be useful tools in creating a successful joint venture. One of the key elements to remember is warrants are not stock. A warrant doesn't receive current distributions. A warrant holder can't vote. These limitations are very important to the way the Coast Guard views warrants. Lots and lots of clever lawyers have tried to create warrant type instruments that operate like current equity and pretty much have been shot down by the Coast Guard in most every instance. So next slide, please. So one other thing to note is that the law focuses the 75% requirement on each tier of ownership, each level of ownership, in other words, such that you can dilute that in a sort of a tiered structure that's shown here, so that the non-citizen actually can own more than 25%, which might appear to be the customary rule, but you can get that foreign ownership up to 49.9%. The Coast Guard, which is the relevant agency, will not permit further dilution. But in any event, you can pretty much structure a 50-50 joint venture with this aggregation, and in combination with debt, creates even more of an economic imbalance. Again, it's a subject that gets complicated very fast, and this is just a presentation of the basics. So the next slide, please. So charters, one other tool to take note of is the use of charters, vessel charters. A time charter to a non-citizen is freely permitted. The trick, however, is it has to be a genuine time charter. It can't be a time charter that is a de facto bareboat charter. In other words, it has to have the elements you would expect to find in a time charter, which is that the time charterer doesn't really control the vessel. The time charterer tells the vessel where to go, what to do, what to pick up, what to drop off, but doesn't control the crew, doesn't place insurance, doesn't approve the placement of insurance, and so on. These edge into bareboat charter type elements of control, and that's where the U.S. Maritime Administration, U.S. Coast Guard will not permit. But time charters are freely, a true time charter is freely permitted. It can serve as a very valuable financing device. It can be a 20-year time charter. It can be on a hell or high water basis. In other words, payments guaranteed, and give the vessel owner the ability with that time charter in hand to go finance the construction of a vessel. That, in fact, is what was done by BP, by Shell, by many other foreign companies over time. Next slide, please. So a bit of propaganda. Final slide, please. And Mike, I tried to stay within 10, 11 minutes here. Glad to keep talking forever, but and also glad, of course, to take questions now or later. You know, that was a pretty quick run through of a very complicated subject. Usually my initial calls with clients about this are about a couple hours of here's your options, and then we structure things out, and you know, and then we come back for a couple hours. So, but look, it gives people the flavor of what's possible.
I think you hit the bullseye, Charlie, and I think that there are a number of people out there who we have left wanting more, and you can get more. Look at those, that name and number and email on the screen. And of course, we're happy at Marine Money to also connect you with Charlie or other speakers that we've had today. So Charlie, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For being part of this and for your support. Thank you.